Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video I'm going to be showing you how I make bone broth for my dogs. So bone broth is a great way to get some nutrition out of bones that are too big for your dogs to actually eat, like femurs. It's also a good little boost for dogs that are eating kibble to get some nutrition out of those bones since they're not eating them regularly. I also like to keep it on hand for my dogs in case they get sick. It's a nice hydration boost, and it's also a good way to encourage them to eat because it's really tasty, and it's also really good to have on hand for making treats. So let's get into what you're going to need. First thing, obviously you'll need some bones. I'll go into the details in a second on what I have. Then you're going to need some sort of acidic liquid. I'm using raw apple cider vinegar. For this batch, I'm making a pretty big batch, so I have about a quarter cup here. You can also use plain vinegar or lemon juice. Also, I'm sorry, my table's a bit of a mess right now. And then the last thing you're going to need is a crock pot. Now you can make this on the stove, however you do need to simmer it for several days, so I don't really recommend it. You can also make it in an Instant Pot if you have one. That'll speed the process up quite a bit, but crock pots are the old standby. They're pretty cheap, so that's just what I use. Alright, so here are the bones I'm using for this batch. Bone broth isn't an exact science, so the bones that I use vary from batch to batch, just depending on what I have on hand. But I'll go ahead and tell you what I'm using for this round. So the first thing I have are some beef femurs that are sliced up. I really like to use these, especially the ends that have the joint, because they're full of connective tissue that'll help your bone broth gel up nicely and get really thick. So I'll put those in there, and then this is another little piece of femur. Then the next thing I have, this is a scapula, I think, from a pork shoulder. For the dogs, when I am prepping their food, I'll usually buy a whole pork shoulder and I'll strip all the meat off of it for them to eat, and then I save the bones left over for bone broth. And then the last thing I have for this batch is just some pig feet that are sliced up. You can't really tell that's a foot, but it's covered. Sorry for the little cut, my camera had a moment. Anyway, pig foot. It's covered in frost, kind of hard to tell it's a pig foot, but these are sliced up pig feet. I fed some of these to the dogs, but these ones that I have left over just have some kind of large bone chunks that I didn't really want to feed. So I saved them for making bone broth. So yeah, that's all that's going to go into this batch. Some other things that I will occasionally add to broth are chicken feet. Again, those have a lot of connective tissue, so they're very good for the dogs. Great for joint health, and also will help your bone broth thicken up and gel nicely. If you've never seen gelled bone broth before, you'll see what I mean at the end. But yeah, so chicken feet sometimes I add. And then another thing I often add that I don't have right now is when when we roast whole chickens for the people, not for the dogs. Often after we're done eating all the meat off of it, I will save the carcass, like the leftover bones and everything like that, and I will throw that in for their bone broth as well. I don't have one right now, but that is often something that I will do. So yeah, you can use really any bones you want. You can use beef, chicken, pork, whatever works for your dog, whatever you have on hand. Like I said, I like to save a lot of bones left over just to help not waste it. So yeah, that's all the bones that are going in. Right now all I've done is added just enough cool filtered water to cover up the bones. You don't want to add too much. And then I'm going to add my apple cider vinegar. And that's about it. Now the vinegar or lemon juice, whatever you're using if you're wondering, is to help make the water a little bit more acidic, so it will break down the bones a little better and extract more of the nutrients out of them. And this is about it. I like to leave mine on high for the first couple hours because I usually use frozen bones, so that just kind of helps get it going, and then I'll switch it to low. If you're using bones from beef and pigs like I am, usually it'll take like 2 to 3 days, I would say, to cook fully. If you're only using poultry bones, 1 to 2 days might do it. If you're using an Instant Pot, it gets done a lot faster, maybe in like, I want to say 12 hours. I'm not sure. I haven't used one, but I think that's what I have heard. Now, forewarning, making bone broth is a little bit of a stinky process. The first day or so, it smells very gamey. So if you want, you can make this outside. I can't do that because there are raccoons around our house that will totally get into it. Or you can make it in like a garage or something like that. But yeah, be forewarned, it's very, very stinky stuff. So yeah, this is about it. Over the next few days, I will top off the water as needed, but this is basically just going to kind of lightly simmer for the next few days, and then I will show you what it looks like when it's done. It has been about 3 days, and my broth is all done cooking now. I just wanted to mention, on the last day of cooking, I like to vent the lid of the crock pot so that some of the extra water can cook off. That just makes it a little bit more concentrated and also increases your chances of getting a nice jiggly broth. While the broth is hot like this, it's not going to jiggle yet. It looks just like normal broth basically, but hopefully once you put it in the fridge, it should be jiggly. So a good way to tell if your broth is done, on these bigger marrow bones, the marrow should be nice and soft. You should be able to scoop it out easily with a fork. If you used any joints like I did, they'll kind of all be falling apart. You'll see a lot of small bits of bones because the connective tissue that was holding them together kind of all disintegrated into the broth. And then some of the smaller bones you might be able to break up easily with a fork like that. They'll just kind of break into pieces. So that's a good way to tell if your broth is done, if you've got those signs present. Now I'm just going to let this broth cool a little bit more, and then I'll take out the bones, the meat, all the gristle, so that I'm just left with the liquid. Then I'll go ahead and put that in the fridge and let it cool down all the way, probably overnight, and then hopefully the broth will be nice and jiggly. The bone broth is all cooled now. There's a solid layer of fat on top, so first I'm just going to spoon that out and throw it away. And there we have it, a nicely gelled bone broth. You can see it's nice and thick, like Jell-O. If your broth didn't gel, don't worry, there's nothing wrong with it. You can still feed it to your dogs, it's just a little bit less concentrated. Alright guys, I think that about wraps up this video. If you're having any problems getting your bone broth to gel, don't worry, it takes a little bit of trial and error. I've been making this for quite a while, so I've got the process down pretty well. Some problems you might be having, you may not have enough bones in there. You may need less water. Remember to try to use just enough water to cover up the bones, nothing more. And also let it cook down a little bit that last day of cooking or so. And then the last problem you might have is there may not be enough connective tissue and joints in there. So you can save up random bones to use just like I do, but make sure you always have something like feet, necks, tails, wings, things like that, something with a lot of joints in it, because the connective tissue is really what helps make it gel up. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.